From the outside, we probably look like the perfect couple. I'm the kind of man who values discipline, order, and predictability in life. I'm focused, work-driven, and I don't believe in wasting time on unnecessary emotions. I've always been that way: direct, straightforward, and conservative in how I live. I don't mess around with sentimentality or drama. I run my life with logic and reason, and I expected the same from my wife. My wife, on the other hand, was different. At first glance, you wouldn't think we'd make a good match. She was more social, more spontaneous, and didn't seem as bothered by rules as I was. She liked things a bit chaotic, a bit unpredictable. But that didn't mean she wasn't responsible or serious. In fact, we shared a lot in common when it came to priorities. We were both career-driven, and she was as focused on her work as I was on mine. We didn't waste time on unnecessary things, and she seemed to appreciate that I wasn't the type to get lost in romantic nonsense. We worked well together, or at least I thought we did. What attracted me to her initially was that despite her different personality, she wasn't needy or clingy. She had her own life, her own ambitions, and we respected each other's space. We weren't the type of couple that spent every moment together, but that worked for us. There was a balance. She didn't expect me to shower her with affection, and I didn't ask her for it either. We kept things practical. Looking back now, I realize I never paid attention to the small signs. There was always a certain charm about how independent she was. She didn't seem like someone who would need to step outside our relationship for attention. I never once questioned her loyalty. We had our boundaries, and I thought they were clear and strong. I didn't believe in overcomplicating things, and she didn't either, or at least, that's what I thought. I had no reason to suspect that something was off, no reason to doubt her. We were two people who had made an agreement on how we wanted to live our lives. There was mutual respect, or so I thought. But I learned that even when everything seems fine on the surface, it doesn't mean it's true. There's something important I need to mention before I go any further. It's a detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but it ended up playing a major role in what came next. Years ago, I made a decision. I got a vasectomy. I never wanted kids. And to be honest, the thought of raising children just never appealed to me. I was always the type of guy who valued my time and my career above all else. I didn't have the patience or desire to raise a family, and I didn't see the point of bringing children into the world when I was so focused on work. My wife felt the same way, or at least that's what she told me. We had discussed it early in our relationship, and she seemed relieved when I brought it up. She wasn't the type to dream of having kids either. Like me, she was obsessed with her career, and she didn't want anything to get in the way of that. We agreed that children would only complicate things, and that wasn't something either of us wanted. We both worked long hours, we were dedicated to what we did, and we weren't interested in the distractions that came with starting a family. When I got the procedure done, it wasn't a big deal. It was quick, straightforward, and we moved on like nothing had changed. In fact, it simplified things for us. No more worrying about accidents or surprises. I didn't have to think about what the future might look like with kids in the picture, and that gave us both peace of mind. We could focus entirely on our careers, on living the life we had planned without any interruptions. Looking back, it's strange how something so small, something as simple as a medical procedure, could play such a huge part in what happened later. At the time, it just felt like the logical thing to do. We both wanted the same thing, and it seemed like the perfect solution to ensure that our lives stayed exactly how we wanted them, uncomplicated. The idea of having children never came up again after that. We both carried on, busy with work, completely content with our child-free lives. I never imagined that decision would come back to haunt me. But it did, in a way I never could have predicted. Our lives became a routine: work, home, and the occasional evening together. We didn't need much else. At least, I didn't. And I thought she didn't either. There's another detail that might seem small, but it's important. After I got the vasectomy, we stopped using condoms. It just didn't make sense anymore. We didn't have to worry about pregnancy, and for us, that was a relief. It became one of the things that set our relationship apart. We didn't have to deal with that typical concern. Over time, it became a routine, something we barely even thought about. It was just part of our life together. At first, It was something we both appreciated. I mean, let's be honest, it's a different experience without condoms. The sensations are more real, more intimate, and we both enjoyed that. It felt like it brought us closer in a way, more relaxed, more natural. We didn't have the usual distractions or barriers. And it was one of those things we could just enjoy without second-guessing or overthinking. It became part of what made our relationship simple, efficient, and convenient, which suited both of us perfectly. The thing is, when you do something for long enough, you stop noticing it. After years of not using protection, it became second nature. It wasn't something we discussed anymore because it was just how things were. We never had a reason to question it. After all, the vasectomy was permanent, and it wasn't like either of us had changed our minds about having kids. We had both made that decision and stuck with it. This lack of concern, this routine, became a kind of foundation for our physical relationship. It was one less thing to think about, one less complication in a life that was already busy enough. I didn't spend any time worrying about it, and I assume she didn't either. Why would she? We had agreed on everything from the beginning. In hindsight, I should have paid more attention. Maybe I should have noticed the small changes, the subtle differences in her behavior. But when you've lived with someone for years, it's easy to become blind to these things. You assume the foundation is strong because nothing has shaken it. You assume that routine means stability, but it doesn't always. That detail, the fact that we hadn't used condoms in years, was something I never thought twice about, but as it turns out, it was about to play a much bigger role than I ever expected. It started gradually. At first, she'd come home a little later than usual, nothing major, just an hour or two after her regular time. I didn't think much of it. We both worked demanding jobs, and I knew how it could be. There are always projects that need finishing, meetings that run late. I didn't question it. I worked from home, being in it, so I was always around, and maybe that made it easier for her to adjust her schedule without me noticing at first. But then, the late nights became more frequent. A couple of times a week, she'd come home later than expected. I started noticing it because it became a pattern. Not just a random late night here or there, but something regular. So one evening, I asked her about it. Nothing aggressive, just a straightforward question: what's been keeping you at work so late? I wasn't suspicious at that point, just curious. She gave me a simple explanation, one that seemed reasonable at the time. She said her team at work had decided to start doing some team-building activities after hours. We work long hours together. She said, but we don't really know each other, so we decided to go out a couple of times a week, grab some drinks, relax a bit. It's supposed to help us work better together. I didn't think much of it at the time. Team building is common enough in corporate environments, and her job had always been important to her. I didn't question her explanation. In fact, I thought it was a good idea. We both knew how stressful work could get, and a bit of socializing with her colleagues seemed harmless enough. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been together for years, and we'd always had a mutual understanding about our careers. I figured this was just another part of her professional life. Plus, she was still coming home sometimes a bit tipsy, sure, but it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary for someone blowing off steam after work. Looking back, I realize how blind I was to what was really going on. But at the time, it all made sense. I didn't see any reason to worry, and I didn't press her on it. We both had busy lives, and I wasn't the kind of guy to hover or micromanage. I believed in giving her space, just like she gave me mine. I wasn't interested in being the type of husband who questioned every move, so I let it slide. I didn't see the need to push for more details. I accepted her explanation and went back to my own work, thinking everything was just fine. But now, I can't help but see that this was the beginning of something I never expected. Something was shifting, and I didn't even realize it. I didn't think much of it at first when she started coming home late. Like I said before, I trusted her. The team-building excuse seemed reasonable, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who constantly questioned his wife's every move. But over time, her late nights became more frequent, and the excuses became thinner. Still, I held back from making a fuss. I was busy with work, and honestly, I didn't want to create unnecessary drama. Then, one night, things went further than I could have imagined. She came home, stumbling through the front door, completely drunk. I hadn't seen her like that in years. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair a mess, and she didn't even seem to know where she had left her purse. It was like she was a completely different person. She'd always been the one who was in control, who knew how to handle herself. But this was something else. She slurred her words, mumbling incoherently as she tried to come over to me, laughing in a way that didn't feel right. She smelled like a bar, reeking of alcohol. It was clear she had been out way longer than usual. I didn't want to make a scene right then, with her in that state. So, I decided to keep things calm. I put my arm around her, helping her walk, and gently guided her toward the bedroom. As we were walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something beyond just the drinking. There was an odd tension in the air, a feeling I couldn't quite place. I wasn't sure what it was, but my instincts told me to stay alert. I figured I'd let her sleep it off and deal with it in the morning. But as I led her toward the bed, something caught my eye. There, on the floor, was an object I hadn't noticed before. I couldn't make out exactly what it was at first, but it was lying there, half hidden near the doorway. It was out of place, something that shouldn't have been there. In that split second, my mind raced with questions, and a strange sense of dread washed over me. I stopped in my tracks, still holding on to her, and stared at that thing on the floor. I didn't fully understand what I was looking at yet, but I knew that whatever it was going to change everything. Something shifted inside me, and I could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her being drunk or coming home late anymore. This was something bigger. My life was about to take a turn, and I could feel it coming, even if I wasn't ready for it yet. I bent down and picked up the object on the floor. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was. A used condom. It had fallen out from the inside of her pants. I stood there, frozen, holding that disgusting piece of evidence in my hand. She had come home in those wide, baggy jeans she liked to wear sometimes, and clearly, in her drunken state, she hadn't even noticed what she was carrying with her. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, but the truth was right there in front of me. There was no other explanation. Everything clicked in that moment. The late nights, the drinking, the excuses about team building with her colleagues, it all came crashing down like a ton of bricks. She hadn't been out bonding with co-workers. She'd been screwing around behind my back, and she hadn't even been careful enough to cover her tracks. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. Either way, it was a slap in the face. I couldn't believe it. After all these years together, all the trust, all the respect, or at least what I thought was respect, she had thrown it all away for what? A cheap thrill? A cheap thrill? A drunken hookup? I stared at her, still half-conscious on the bed, completely oblivious to the bomb that had just gone off in my head. I wanted to scream at her, shake her awake, demand an explanation. But what could she say that would change any of this? The proof was literally in my hand. My mind raced with anger, confusion, and disbelief. How long had this been going on? Who was she with? Was it just one guy? Or had this become some sort of routine for her while I sat at home, trusting her? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. All those nights she came home late, all those times she brushed me off with some half-assed excuse this is what was really happening. I couldn't stand to look at her. My chest tightened, and my hands were shaking with rage. I tossed the condom onto the floor, feeling a surge of disgust. She didn't even stir. She was too drunk to care. Too far gone to realize that her whole charade had come crashing down. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to figure out what to do next. The room felt smaller, like it was closing in on me. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And for a moment, I thought I might explode. I had never been a guy who let emotions get the better of me. But right then, I wanted to break something. I wanted to grab her and make her look me in the eye and tell me why she did this. But there was no point. She was passed out, clueless to the storm she had just unleashed. I took a step back, trying to breathe, trying to control the urge to scream at her. This was not how I had imagined my life turning out. We had a system, a partnership. We were supposed to be different from all those couples who let things fall apart. We had an understanding, didn't we? But now it was clear I had been living in some kind of fantasy, completely blind to what was happening right under my nose. The shock gave way to pure rage. I stormed back into the bedroom, my voice exploding before I could even stop myself. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, pointing to the condom still lying on the floor. She stirred, groggy and confused, barely understanding what was happening. "What the fuck fell out of you just now?" I could barely control my anger, my voice echoing through the room. Her eyes snapped open as she registered the accusation, but instead of looking guilty, she went straight into defense mode. "How dare you accuse me of that?" she yelled, stumbling off the bed. "You think I would cheat on you after all these years?" Her voice was loud, almost hysterical, as if I had crossed some unforgivable line by even suggesting it. It was unreal. I'm the one holding the evidence, but she was acting like the victim. Before I could say another word, she rushed at me, fists swinging. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she screamed, hitting me in the chest. Her punches were wild, clumsy from the alcohol, but the fury behind them was real. "You think I'd betray you? You think I'd fuck someone else behind your back?" She was furious, her face red with rage, but it wasn't making any sense. The proof was right there, and yet she was attacking me like I was the one in the wrong. I tried to grab her wrists to stop her from hitting me, but she kept swinging. "Calm down," I yelled, trying to hold her steady. "Just look at what's on the floor." "What's this, huh? How do you explain this?" I was desperate for her to admit it, for her to stop lying, but instead she only became more unhinged. Her eyes were wild, filled with anger, and she was screaming at me, calling me names, cursing me out like I was some stranger who had crossed her. Then, in a split second, she broke free of my grip and lunged toward the kitchen. I didn't realize what she was doing until I saw her hand reach for the drawer. She pulled out a knife, holding it in front of her, trembling but with a crazed look in her eyes. "You don't get to accuse me," she shouted, pointing the blade in my direction. "You don't get to tell me what I did or didn't do." Her voice was shaking, but there was real venom behind it. I froze for a second, completely thrown by how quickly things had escalated. This wasn't the woman I had married. She had never been violent, never acted this way before. Now she was standing there, drunk and furious, holding a knife like she was ready to do something insane. I took a step back, trying to keep my voice calm, despite the storm raging inside me. "Put the knife down," I said, holding my hands up. "Just put it down, and let's talk. We can figure this out." But she wasn't listening. She was too far gone, too wrapped up in her own rage and denial. She took a step toward me, the knife still raised, her hands shaking. "How dare you accuse me?" she screamed again, her voice cracking. "You don't know anything about what I've been through." I kept my distance, trying to defuse the situation. I didn't know what she was capable of anymore. Everything I thought I knew about her had been shattered in the last few minutes. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about control, power, and how quickly things could spiral out of control when trust is broken. As she stood there, trembling and holding that knife, I reached down and grabbed the condom off the floor. My blood was boiling, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Look at this," I shouted, waving it in front of her. "You're telling me I don't know anything? You're telling me I'm wrong?" This fell out of view. My voice was raw with anger, each word cutting through the room like a blade. For a split second, she froze. Her eyes flicked from the condom in my hand to the knife she was holding, and then something clicked. The realization hit her like a truck. She looked down, her face draining of color, and I saw the truth finally break through the haze of her drunkenness. The knife slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor, and she just stood there, staring at the evidence of her betrayal. Tears welled up in her eyes almost instantly. Her body crumpled, and she began to sob, her whole frame shaking as the weight of what she had done crashed down on her. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she choked out, barely able to speak through the tears. It was the alcohol. It was a mistake. My friends. I don't know how her words were a mess, stumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to explain, to make sense of what she had done. But I wasn't having any of it. I stood there, seething, fist clenched, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't mean for this to happen," I spat, my words laced with disgust. "You're blaming the alcohol? Your friends? That's your excuse for this?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was sitting there, crying, trying to make it sound like this was something that just happened to her, as if she had no control over it. She kept sobbing, her hands covering her face, as if she could hide from the reality of what she had done. "Please, just listen," she begged, her voice breaking. I never wanted this. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking." But I cut her off, my rage flaring up again. "You think this is something you can just cry your way out of?" I snapped. "You think saying it was the alcohol makes this okay? That it excuses what you did?" Her sobs only grew louder, more desperate, as she fell to her knees, clutching at the sides of her head. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," she kept repeating over and over, like it was some kind of mantra that could undo everything. But sorry wasn't going to cut it. Not now. Not after everything she had done. I paced the room, barely able to contain the fury bubbling up inside me. Every glance at her pathetic form on the floor, crying and shaking, only fueled my anger more. She had wrecked everything we built, everything we'd worked for. And now she wanted to chalk it up to a drunken mistake. I wasn't buying it. "You betrayed me," I said coldly, my voice low but full of anger. "You didn't make a mistake, you made a choice. You chose to go out, to get drunk, to sleep with someone else. And now you expect me to just stand here and accept your tears as an apology?"
No.
I shook my head, refusing to let her off the hook. She could cry all she wanted. There was no coming back from this. She collapsed further onto the floor, her sobs becoming frantic, but I didn't care. The damage was done. In a fit of rage, I stormed toward her closet, ripping open the doors. Everything she owned, every piece of clothing, every trinket, it all felt tainted now. I couldn't stand to look at it. I grabbed her favorite sweater, the one she wore when we went out for dinners, and flung it out the window. It tumbled down onto the street below, a symbol of everything I was about to destroy. She watched me with wide eyes, the panic setting in as I continued my rampage. "What are you doing?" she screamed, scrambling to her feet, trying to grab my arm. "You can't just throw my things away. This is insane." But I wasn't in the mood to listen. I ripped down more of her clothes, tossing them out one after the other, the fabric flying through the air like a bird escaping a cage. "Insane. You think this is insane?" I shot back, my voice dripping with contempt. "What's insane is how you thought you could betray me and then come home like nothing happened. You don't get to play the victim here." I turned my back to her, grabbing more items from her drawers, jeans, tops, shoes, anything I could find, and sent them flying out the window. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, drowning out any remnants of the pain I felt. With each piece of clothing that hit the ground, I felt a bit lighter, as if I was shedding the weight of her betrayal. But she was still there, standing in the chaos, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. "Stop it. Just stop," she yelled, her voice rising with desperation. "You're being ridiculous. This won't solve anything." I shot her a glare. "You don't get to tell me what's ridiculous after what you did." "You've lost that privilege," I replied coldly, throwing a few more items out the window. I could feel my heart racing, my anger still boiling just beneath the surface. She began to plead with me, trying to grab at my hands, trying to stop me from tossing out her life, but I shoved her away. "Just let me explain. I'll make it right, I swear. Just give me a chance," she cried, tears streaming down her face. But her words fell on deaf ears. I was done listening to her excuses. I didn't want to hear how she thought she could fix this with a few tearful apologies. I couldn't look at her without feeling sick, without remembering the image of that condom on the floor. With one final push, I grabbed the last of her things, a handbag that held memories of better times, and sent it flying out the window too. It landed in a heap on top of her other discarded items. I stood there, breathing heavily, surveying the destruction around me. It felt liberating, but it also felt hollow. She sank back onto the floor, defeated, the fight drained from her. "You've lost your mind," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't believe you would do this, but I didn't care." The more I saw her broken on the floor, the more I felt justified. She had destroyed our trust, and now I was destroying everything that reminded me of her betrayal. I took a step back, looking out at the mess I had created. Maybe it was reckless, maybe it was petty, but it felt necessary. As I caught my breath, I realized this was only the beginning. I had a long way to go before I could truly get over what she had done. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of her life I'd just thrown out the window, and looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "You can't do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "We're married. You can't just throw me out like this. It's a mistake, just one stupid moment. We can forget it ever happened." Please, her voice was strained, as if she still believed there was something left to salvage. I stared at her, my expression cold and unyielding. "Forget it," I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. "You expect me to just forget that you cheated on me? That you came home with a condom falling out of your pants and a knife in your hand? You think that's something I can just push aside?" I shook my head, my anger simmering just beneath the surface, ready to explode again. She crawled toward me, her hands outstretched, as if she could physically stop me from walking away. "Please," she begged, "I didn't mean any of it. The knife, the shouting, it was all just a reaction. I didn't know what I was doing. I love you, I swear, I didn't want to hurt you." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and for a second, I almost believed she was sincere. But then I remembered how easily she had lied to my face before. I took a step back, distancing myself from her pathetic display. "You love me," I scoffed. "That's rich. You didn't seem to care about that when you were screwing some other guy, did you? And then you had the nerve to come home and act like I'm the one out of line for questioning it? You pulled a knife on me, and now you expect me to forget all of that?" She flinched at my words, realizing just how serious I was. She was panicking now, scrambling to find some way to keep me from leaving. "It's not like that," she sobbed, her voice shaky. "I wasn't thinking straight. It was a mistake just one night. You can't throw everything away over one mistake." She was grasping at straws, hoping that somehow I'd change my mind. I stared down at her, my patience gone. "One mistake," I repeated bitterly. "You think trying to stab me in a drunken rage was just a mistake? You think cheating on me was just a moment we can forget? You're delusional if you think this is something I can forgive." I pointed toward the door, my voice hard as stone. "Get out. I'm done. We're done." She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't kick me out. We're married. We can work through this. We have to. You can't just end it like this." Her voice was rising in panic, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "You should be thanking me," I said coldly, my voice like ice. "Thanking me that I'm not calling the police for what you did tonight. For pulling that knife on me, for coming at me like you were going to kill me. You should be on your knees, thanking me that all I'm doing is kicking you out." Her face crumpled as my words sank in, and she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. But I wasn't moved by her tears anymore. They meant nothing to me now. "I'm filing for divorce," I continued, my voice calm but resolute. "And when it's done, I don't want to see you again. You've destroyed everything, and there's no coming back from this." I pointed to the door again, making it clear that her time was up. "Take what's left of your things and get out of my house. You don't live here anymore."